Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Syasya Adhwa Binti Ahmad Afiza, a final year student of Applied Chemistry at Universiti Teknologi Arau. Today I'll be presenting my final year project titled Abundance and Distribution of Microplastics in Coastal Water and Sediment in Malaysia and Selected Countries from Southeast Asia, a review. Supervised by Mr. Shar Aizat bin Kamaruddin. To begin with the presentation, we will have a look at the table of contents. I will cover the introduction, problem statement, significance of study, objectives, literature review, and conclusion and recommendation. So, what are microplastics? Microplastics are a synthetic material made from polymer which are long repeating chains of molecule groups. The components of microplastics cannot be decomposed, therefore they are non-biodegradable. Microplastics are categorized as plastics with sizes less than 5 millimeters. Microplastics can either originate from primary sources, where they are manufactured purposely for commercial use, such as microbeads in cosmetics, skincare products, and microfibers in textile clothing, or from secondary source where they result from larger plastic debris which loses their structure due to degradation from physical, chemical, and biological process. The issue of microplastics is millions of tons of microplastics are distributed everywhere. Microplastics have a high surface area to volume ratio, making them prone to absorbing persistent organic pollutants. Bioaccumulative and hazardous pollutants are also inclined to be absorbed by microplastics. Therefore, microplastic pollution has led to growing environmental, marine, and public health concern. The problem statement of this study is microplastics contamination is considered ubiquitous and a persistent problem in the world's ocean, posing a serious threat to the marine ecology, soil qualities, and human health. Although some studies have been undertaken to explore microplastic contamination along Malaysia's, Indonesia's, and Thailand's coastal waters and sediment, there is still a dearth of knowledge on the severity of microplastic pollution. Therefore, the abundance and distribution of microplastics in the chosen countries should be reviewed in order to formulate management plans to reduce the occurrence of microplastics contamination. The objective of this study is to address the microplastic situation in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. In addition, it is also to provide further information as well as baseline data for future microplastic contamination investigations. The objectives are to review current studies of microplastics in coastal waters and sediments in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. And the other one is to make a comparative study of the abundance and distribution of microplastics in the chosen countries. These are the literature reviews which I will cover in the next section of the video. We'll move on to the sources of microplastics in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. As you can observe from this table, Indonesia triumphed over the other reviewed countries with 0.48 to 1.29 million metric tons per year of plastic debris entering the marine, followed by Thailand and finally Malaysia. The studies I have reviewed indicated the sources of microplastics in coastal areas are primarily from inefficient waste management system, from inland surface runoff, and marine factors, significantly from fishing and boating activities. Majority of the source in the reviewed areas falls under secondary source. Here is a table of the abundance of microplastics in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. From the table, Tambak Loro has the highest abundance of microplastics compared to others. This is because Tambak Loro Coastal is known as a hotspot for microplastic due to a variety of factors, including untreated domestic sewage from Semarang City entering the seawater, famous dumping sites for the locals, large-scale fishing activities, and increasing severity of the inundation. The second highest abundance of microplastics is Banten Bay, Indonesia. The explanation for this abundance are parts of Banten Bay, which faces Java Seas, affects strong tidal currents, and also the river flow from Chujung River, where it successfully transported a large amount of stranded microplastics into the coastal area. Moreover, Banten Bay experienced an increase in coastal development for the past decade, which leads to an increase in population pressure. Phuket Island obtained the third highest abundance of microplastics compared to the other studies. This is due to the island's heavy tourism and harbor activities. Moving on to the distribution of microplastics in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. Distribution of microplastics are affected by wave currents, tides, cyclones, wind directions, and river hydrodynamics. Microplastics enter directly into riverine system from inland anthropogenic activities and transported into the sea. There, tidal flow is one of the factors that will affect the distribution of microplastics. For instance, strong tidal flow conditions results in lower accumulation of microplastics in coastal areas as they are redistributed. This is because where the main tidal current have the biggest amplitude, it will wash off the microplastics and microplastics will travel further from the original areas, whereas low flow conditions will lead to an increase in microplastic accumulation. The periodic nature of low flow tidal currents will have little net effect, thus microplastics hardly move around from the area. These conditions were observed in Bantam Bay, Thailand, Gulf of Thailand, Bantam Bay, Indonesia, and Cilacap coastal water, Indonesia. In addition, strong winds, wave actions, and turbulence can cause vertical mixing in the water column, thus resuspending microplastics from the bottom and moving them to a nearer location. Microplastics from land and eroded areas can be transported to coastal regions by strong winds. This condition was reported in Bantam Bay, Thailand. Monsoon activities heavily influence the distribution of microplastics in coastal areas. Generally, during this period, larger amount of microplastic debris will be transported to the coastal area due to the intensity of hydrodynamic conditions. However, the reviewed studies were not conducted during monsoon seasons, therefore no records were reported. Moving on to the sampling techniques of microplastics. For water sampling techniques, the water surface are generally collected with a trawl using nets, sieves, or pumps. However, for the reviewed areas, majority of the water samples were obtained using calibrated steel bucket containers. Because of that, filtration process via vacuum system were required to extract the microplastics from water sample. For sediment sampling techniques, direct sampling at the beach were conducted with the aid of either box core, gravity core, or shovel. Density flotation method were chosen for the separation process for all the reviewed studies. Next, I will talk about the impacts of microplastics contamination. First of all, microplastics affects marine life because the microscopic sizes of microplastics are mistaken as food by aquatic organisms. Consumption of microplastics by aquatic organisms leads to blockage in digestive tracts, changes of feeding behavior, malnutrition to marine creatures, energy depletion due to starvation, all of which lowers the growth and reproductive yield of aquatic life. Moreover, microplastic also affects soil property as it harms the growth of plant species by depleting in oxygen and reduces the availability of light in buried soils. Microplastics in high quantities can disrupt the soil biophysical environment by altering the geochemical cycles within soil systems due to microplastics leaching compounds. Whereas the bioaccumulation and biomagnification at higher trophic levels will create a chain effect that will deteriorate human health for those who consume the contaminated seafood. The toxicity of chemicals from small particles of plastics leads to cancers, immune system issues, and reproductive problems. Next, we will discuss the management plans for microplastic contamination. Management plans should be divided into three, that is for short, medium, and long-term solution. For short-term solution, society as a whole must excessively lessen the use of unnecessary single-use plastic. For medium-term solution, the government must propose regulation to strengthen the waste management system. An effort to this approach can be seen in Indonesia, where they have devised a reverse logistics system. In this system, plastic garbage is returned to the manufacturers. Factories then will manage the waste by recycling and repurposing the plastic waste. Moreover, waste treatment facilities should be strengthened and improved in order to efficiently separate and prevent microplastics from entering marine system. For the long-term solution, it should include the study and development of bioremediation methods such as microplastic, biodegradation employing bacteria. In conclusion, And evidence of existing studies suggested that microplastic particles of different shapes, types, and sizes are presented and contaminated in coastal ecosystem and its sediment of Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. The distribution of microplastic varies from direct anthropogenic activities into coastal water by riverine system and environmental factors such as wind, wave, and tidal motions. It is recommended that additional research and investigations in sources of microplastics, factors affecting microplastics degradation and fragmentation, standard protocol for microplastic sampling analysis, and the effects of microplastics to human health, aquatic species, and soil properties are needed in a better understanding of the issues and the formulation of long-term solution to alleviate microplastics pollution. That is all from me. Thank you very much for viewing and listening to my presentation.